I'm not a critic of capitalism that necessarily says market-based economies based on freedom of exchange are by their nature bad, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I do think
Phails at philosophy.
I tend to believe that mid-20th century American capitalism, with all its problems, coming out of the 1970s was just going in the right direction because it was a form of capitalism that tried to emphasize the value of free exchange, but also recognize that there are many areas where we engage in free exchange that the privatization of that free exchange needs to be reined in, whether that is healthcare or whether that is food. I mean, look at the history of food deserts. You know what a food desert
I've
is?
heard of these.
Yeah.
Tell me more about food
food
deserts.
desert. I lived in a food desert in Philadelphia. It's a place where, and they're often urban areas, although they're also rural areas. My mother-in-law lived in a food desert. The closest grocery store, full-service grocery store to her, south of Houston, outside of Houston, was a 45-minute drive.
What?
That's part of why we had to move her here, right?
45 minutes drive to a full-service grocery store?
Right. Exactly.
What?
And, I'd be in Philadelphia.
And she was in the city?
No, she's in the rural area. That's what I'm saying. But in the city, it may not be quite as far a drive, but you're in an urban area with a lot of people, especially like in Philadelphia, don't have cars. And they don't necessarily have, like I would have to go miles within a city once I got far enough out into West Philadelphia to get a full service grocery store.
So why is this important? Why is food?
So if you look at the history of food deserts, there's not a food desert problem in the 70s, right?
Well, because in the rural areas, there were farmers and ranchers and they had community.
There's a lot,
and in the urban areas, they needed groceries that came from the rural area.
It's not the agricultural system itself. It's the grocery system that changed, right?
Well, there weren't grocery stores in rural areas, were there?
There were small grocery stores in each little town that provided full-service grocery stores, even though they were small. And they've been replaced by these big box grocery stores like H-E-B, right? So what happened in
Consolidation?
the 1980s? Well, Reagan deregulated the grocery industry. The grocery industry actually had a level of pricing regulation that was there to try to make sure that the food web remained accessible to people. And on an ideology of free market economics, he came in and said, well, this is nonsense. This isn't going to produce the best access to food because you don't have competition. And so deregulated it. And when he deregulated it, just like when banking was deregulated, what you see is then the consolidation and concentration of capital into increasingly larger entities who then dominate the market.
And then
they drive up the prices even worse because now they control it and they can harvest that for capital.
So when it goes wrong, it goes wrong everywhere.
Yeah. Capitalism works when it's maintained as a small scale entity, right? I think, if I were designing the perfect system, and here we're just shooting our mouth off, right? A bit of a distance from where we were with the book. But I would say you'd want a system where there's a certain level of scale. You're just not allowed to operate at that scale, right? Scale can bring a lot of advantages, but some of those advantages bring so much vicious incentive.
Well, it gets fragile because when a mistake happens, it's kind of like the romaine industry or whatever. When you have one provider or two providers giving the romaine to the whole country, if there's E. coli in romaine, it goes everywhere.
Right.
Whereas if we have a romaine person making romaine, sending romaine out in every state, if it goes wrong, it goes wrong in one state.
Right. And if your approach to solving the problem of E. coli is to say, let's centralize this, let's control the whole romaine system.
And make sure it's always clean.
That E. coli never happens. Well, you're not going to pull that off.
You're not going to pull it off because mistakes happen, number one. And number two, when they centralize it, a lot of people lose jobs and all of the money, all the margins, because someone's going to make a lot more money, right? They're going to optimize on the economies of scale and all of those things. That stuff doesn't filter down. This Reaganomics, this trickle-down economics, that's not a thing. They just say, oh, this is more money for our stockholders. This is more money for our CEO. This is more money. So it ends up being just like a cash grab. And then there's less people at the bottom making money in general, and then the money they make goes straight to the top. And then when something bad happens, it happens everywhere because you've got a system, like a small system that controls everything. It this is why I just need to stop getting involved, like understanding, because there's nothing I can, if I can use this platform to complain and people like it and maybe someone does something about it, that'd be great.
But I guess this is a question. Where do you get off caring about things at that scale? Right?
Where do I get off caring about things
Right,
at a
'cause-
national scale?
Right. Like I'm just thinking like, and I'm using that
That's
as
why
a kind of accusatory sense. Like I think at the root there is this sense of like we approach these problems like they're problems where what we need to do is become the controller and solve the problem.
Well, because they've taken us with communication and technology. I think I'm just going to make a wild statement and we can both decide whether or not it's true or not. Because of communication and technology, folks focus more on a world stage or a national stage than they do on a local stage.
Yes, I think that to some extent. And I think and they
Which is the opposite of what needs to happen.
Right.
We need to be focused on our local stage and be like, what's going on with my neighbor? What's going on with our communities here?
Right.
Than what's going on in, you know.
But what's going on there affects like there are things, but I think yes. I mean the larger point you're making I think is true. The way I would rephrase it is we need to shift from looking at a problem and saying, if I could just get control of this situation, how could we solve it? And why aren't people doing that who are in control of the situation? And instead say, coming back to the network idea, as a node within a network of relationships, what can I do to contribute to the good? Right?